Very much, Dr. Naveed. May I please now invite Dr. Viragon Ongsagun, Associate Professor from Energy Field of Study, School of Environment, Resources, and Development of AIT, to be our session chair for today. Dr. Viragon, please.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Today's session, we have two speakers. The first one is Professor Thomas Gulledge on managing the extended enterprise and enterprise architecture approach. In the second session, will be delivered by Professor Joydeep Datta, former Vice President of Academic Affairs of AIT, on practical nanotechnology today, concepts to applications. Before we start, let me introduce the first speaker, Professor Thomas Gulledge. He obtained Bachelor of Science in Economics, Mathematics, University of South Carolina in 1975, Master of Art, Economics and Mathematics, Clemson University in 1977, and PhD Engineering Management, Systems Engineering in the same university, 1981. He is holding the position as a President, Enterprise Integration Inc., U.S., and Professor Emeritus, George Mason University, U.S. His expertise is in enterprise planning and management, logistics and supply chain integration and management, extended enterprise integration, and product life cycle management. So I think the topic also is quite interesting because he also has a lot of experience in the business as well as linkage with academia. So please welcome Professor Thomas Gulledge on stage.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And first I want to thank the organizers of this event for letting me speak. I appreciate that very much. It's a pleasure to be in Thailand. I've spent quite a bit of time in Asia, including Thailand, so I'll try my best to relate this to my knowledge of the situation in the region, although I'll admit right up front that I certainly am not an expert in all the countries in the region. A lot of our business has been in Singapore and Hong Kong, China, some in Thailand, but we've been fortunate enough to be able to implement a number of supply chain solutions for many of the third-party logistics providers and some private supply chains in the region. Today, I'm going to talk to you about an approach to implementation that you may or may not have thought about in the past. If you're not from the IT disciplines or the enterprise management disciplines, this may be new to you, and I'll try to make it understandable in a way that is intuitive to you. But if you are from the IT disciplines, you may disagree with some of the things that I say in this presentation today, and I hope that we'll be able to discuss that later today in a session that we're going to have, a panel discussion session. But let me give you kind of the bottom line up front, and then we'll get to the slides. I've studied why projects fail for most of my career. Many years in studying that at the university, and then trying to understand it in practice through our company, which we started in 1999. And we've been fortunate to be able to work on some very large projects. We designed the logistics system for the U.S. Army, the enterprise system for the U.S. Navy. For every Nike product that's shipped from any Asian country to North and South America, we were We designed that solution and managed that out of Singapore and others. So we've been able to judge this problem firsthand. And I've seen this over and over and over again. This is the way a project will usually evolve. Someone inside of an organization will perceive a need. Something's not working correctly, not working efficiently, therefore we need to improve. It will start typically with a PowerPoint presentation, kind of a proposal to try to convince colleagues and sell the concept to managers. And then it usually evolves into a spreadsheet list of requirements. Then someone inside of the organization is tapped to go and survey, meet with commercial software vendors, and based on that list of requirements and the perceived need, to try to select a product to best meet those needs. I can honestly say that that approach seldom delivers the desired result. In almost every case that I've been associated with, the end result has been an unhappiness that the system did not deliver what was expected. And in trying to understand that, the solutions that we have proposed are usually not adopted on the initial implementation. It's usually the second time around, during the reinstall, when they're trying to better align their systems with their business in order to achieve specific outcomes, that the approach that we recommend is adopted. Now, I can't explain why that is. The organizational dynamics from the software vendor side are very different than the organizational dynamics from the implementing company side, but that's typically the way that things work. So what I'm going to show you today is something that many companies do not do, but a lot of companies have taken this approach. And as a matter of fact, this is one of the fastest growing areas in enterprise management today. And the Gartner Group, which is a large IT consulting group, if you're from other disciplines, estimate that 50% of the Fortune 1000 companies will be doing this over the next decade. So with that introduction, I'll try to see if I can make this work, and we'll get in. And here's the first slide, which I've already talked about. This will be the plan for this presentation. I'm going to explain a concept that's called enterprise integration. It's in my company name, so I believe in it. It's not a technical definition. It will surprise you, and it's much more comprehensive. Then I'm going to expand that definition to include something that I call extended enterprise integration, which is the basic concept that's relevant for supply chain management, which is a primary focus of this conference and a direction that AIT is developing capabilities in right now. Then I'm going to introduce something I call enterprise business architecture. It's not a technical architecture. It's not how to build a software product. Many analogies with some of the presentations from yesterday. I mean, you would never build a building from a photograph. So why would you ever build a software solution from a PowerPoint deck? The building construction disciplines are much more mature in terms of architectural planning and management than the IT sectors, but that's improving. Then I'm going to relate it directly to supply chains with probably one of the most relevant topics for today in supply chain integration and management, the concept of a control tower. And I'll provide you with some anecdotes from some of the companies that we have consulted with in the region who are trying to implement control towers right now. Then in the end, we'll talk about some of the implementation barriers, the challenges, and we'll get to the conclusion. So I'll try my best to move through this to get us back on schedule so we can move forward. So, what is enterprise integration? If you go to Google and you search on enterprise integration, you're probably not going to get this definition unless you happen to hit my website. You're going to get back something that's more technical about how systems communicate with each other, protocols, standards for how systems communicate. You can see my concept is much broader. It includes not only the systems, which are really an afterthought in our approach. It's primarily focused on the business, understanding the business processes that are associated with delivering against the objectives in some business plan, and data. And then if those things are aligned, then the systems can be almost as an afterthought aligned with them. So I'm defining enterprise integration that include all of the managerial and technological factors that enable what we call business process integration. And if you think about it, managers, this is kind of a delicate subject because we cross the line. We talk a lot with information technology executives, and we also talk with senior managers on the operations side of a business. Managers think in terms of processes. You can talk to anyone on the business side, and their orientation towards delivering value to the customer is from executing business processes. They have some inputs, they do some transformations through some process logic, and in the end, they deliver an output that hopefully adds value to the customer. IT people historically have not thought in terms of business processes. They've thought in terms of systems and connectivity around those systems. So there's a basic, what appears to be a disconnect here. And if we've made any contribution at all, it's in pulling those two things closer together so that we can align the business more closely with IT. If we're successful in doing that, then the end result is a more customer-oriented organization that adds value to the customer. And the overall objective is to eliminate the problem, the number one problem in information technology today, and has been for the last 15 years, is how to better align IT with the business. Computer Sciences Corporation does a comprehensive survey every year on the challenges that CIOs face inside of, or chief information officers face inside of organizations. And with the exception of a couple of years, the number one challenge was and remains the alignment of information technology with the business. And from my point of view, that means the organizational plans and the business processes that are linked to those plans. So how do we align? And enterprise business architecture is focused on that. Enterprise integration is the achievement of that objective. Now, the extended enterprise. Well, in this case, I'm really extending the basic definition to include other constituents and claimants on the organization. This is not something that I created. This is a very common term in the IT literature that was first coined, I believe, by the Yankee Group, a U.S. consulting company. And as a matter of fact, I should tell you that I figure out how to work. Whoops. I referenced the Yankee Group in this from this picture. Is it okay? Okay, thank you. The extended enterprise takes the concept of enterprise integration and includes suppliers, customers, and any other organizational claimants or stakeholders that would deliver value to an end customer. Now, this is the supply chain, the extended enterprise, because when you look at the concept of enterprise integration, that it applies inside of an organization, even though that's a very difficult problem, it's a very easy problem to coordinate vis-a-vis the extended enterprise problem, because now you've got suppliers who are sometimes partners and sometimes competitors, and you've got customers that are quite fickle sometimes and don't always behave the way that you would like them to behave. And so when we include the suppliers, the back office, which is primarily the gold standard for that is enterprise resource planning systems, the front office, which is primarily sales and the automation through customer relationship management systems, when you combine that together, you've got a much more difficult problem to plan and coordinate. But this is the supply chain problem. I mean, we have to track from the beginning to end with total visibility, not only the flow of physical goods from suppliers to the end source customer, but also we have to align that with financials, and also we have to manage the risk associated with any disruptions that might occur in the extended enterprise. So extended enterprise integration is the extension of the definition of enterprise integration to include other claimants, customers, suppliers, or partners, or any other stakeholder in achieving organizational objectives. So we have a simple model. It's top down. It's not bottom up. We don't start drawing systems and connecting them together with in kind of a wiring diagram type model. We start with the organizational objectives that are typically codified in something like a strategic plan. A strategic plan defines strategic goals based on some mission and some vision for the future. And those strategic goals are broken down into specific objectives. Those objectives have a target and a time horizon associated with them. Senior executives are very comfortable with this model. They change the direction of their organization based on resourcing relative to these objectives, and those objectives may even be broken down further into projects. Those objectives have to be aligned with the business processes inside the organization, and it's very easy to understand why that is. If you've got very efficient business processes and you're not aligned with the strategic plan, you're just doing the wrong thing efficiently. So the first stage of alignment is to try to understand how the plans inside of an organization relate to the processes. And with all respect, that does not have very much to do with information technology. It has to do everything with the way managers organize in order to do their work, in order to meet the requirements that are coming down from senior management. Then at a lower level, we have data and we have systems. Data is an asset for an organization, and it's a management responsibility to manage, own, and understand data. So we treat it a little bit differently, and you'll see it in our full model when I show it to you. But systems are really kind of, as I mentioned earlier, are kind of an afterthought. If we've got the plans of an organization, the strategic direction aligned with the business processes, and the data also aligned with the business processes, then we've got management control over the organization, and then we can align the systems as required. So let's get into details. This is my definition of enterprise business architecture. Executives have different expectations than the IT organization. I mean, if you talk to any senior executive or any senior executive, at least that we have talked to, they expect efficiencies in the IT organization. I mean, we just went through 10 years of IT executives trying to sell service-oriented solutions to business executives based on achieving efficiencies. That didn't work out very well. I mean, we are moving towards service-oriented solutions, but the business thinks in terms of competitive advantage and selling products to customers. So for the IT department to be relevant, it has to think the same way as the business. They have to show that they can add value in terms of helping the business meet customer demands, which typically means achieving competitive advantage and delivering a better product to the customer. Things are always changing. in the discipline that I'm in IT, this is difficult. You spend millions of dollars in implementing a software solution, and then something changes. Maybe a financial policy inside the organization changes. Maybe some external government policy causes some changes inside the organization. It's very difficult to rapidly realign and order your business processes and bring the systems into alignment with it when things are changing. But that's what executives are demanding from IT groups today, and there are solutions that are available to help with that. From a business point of view, increasing revenue and profitability are still the primary drivers that we see. There is some additional focus on sustainability and other things, but by and large, in most of the world, the focus is still on profitability and market share and investments. So from a justification point of view, IT managers have to ensure that the investments that are made in their solutions are meeting corporate goals and objectives. So the question is, how do we plan in this complex environment where everything is constantly changing and investments are quite expensive, and implementation projects, once they're in place, are very difficult to change? Well, what's emerging in the IT literature is the primary mechanism to support the planning, which is it doesn't replace the importance of human interaction, and it's neither a necessary nor a sufficient condition for success, but the enterprise business architecture is the primary planning mechanism. So it's up to me to explain to you what that is, but that is not only my prediction, that is Gartner's prediction. And I had the opportunity to work on a very complex project with the recently retired CIO of General Motors once upon a time, and it had to do with realigning an organization. And this particular organization, they thought they had a strategic plan, but they really didn't. They went through a ritual every year where they created a document, but it was not something that truly guided their organization. It was almost like shelfware, the way that we call it. So as he explained to me very carefully at the time, I was junior at the time, he said that a plan does not guarantee success, but you're much more likely to succeed with a plan than without a plan. And I saw this firsthand, though, that it is not a sufficient condition. We designed the information architecture for a large company in Turkey that builds refineries and pipelines all across Central Asia and all the way back into Russia. They had no planning process at all. They were running the company on kind of a Turkish version of a small business accounting system, and they were making so much money that they couldn't spend it. So if you're doing the right thing and you're in the right place in the right time, you can do quite well, even though you don't follow best practice in terms of planning and management. So enterprise architecture or enterprise business architecture, however you want to define it, it's neither a necessary nor a sufficient condition for success. Its success depends on how managers engage it and how they use it in order to solve particular problems. So, this graphic's a little difficult to read. We've written a lot on this subject. I've got many papers that I can share with you to provide with you, but the major components of an enterprise business architecture are described in kind of the central part of this graphic, and I've aligned it with supply chain management, although I will argue that it could be aligned with other major initiatives inside of an organization as well. The central concept are the high-level business processes that are formally linked to the organization's plans. That's typically done in small groups working together between architects and managers, not IT people. They typically participate, but they're as observers because their role comes later. At lower levels, we detail those high-level processes to include sub-processes for particular implementation areas. In this case, I've demonstrated supply chain management as the decomposed area of interest. It could be product lifecycle management, it could be customer relationship management, it could be whatever. But the main point of this is there is a high-level understanding of the organization and how these processes fit within the organization without thinking about technology at all. This is how we're going to run our business, and it's a more detailed plan than something that's written up in a Word document or something like that. It's typically captured in a modern modeling tool of some type that's designed specifically to document this type of information and place it under configuration management control for future use. And then at the third level, we align the data. Now, I know that in many enterprise architecture projects, data is not considered. For us, it's the most important part of all. Like, we're in the middle of a big project right now, working with IBM on a complex data integration model that has some very large systems on the technology landscape. 41 Oracle system, a lot of proprietary developed systems, and many other types of systems that are on the landscape. And senior executives kind of take this for granted, but this is the problem. Somebody in one of those systems will change a particular piece of data. If it's not under strict control and managed in the right kind of way, that data will cause one of the other systems to, in some cases, to even completely go down. So the data has to be aligned with the processes, and it has to be managed. And this is a very, very complex problem, and in many cases it's overlooked, and it's a source of great cost in organizations. And many times when really big enterprise projects fail, it's not because of the process configuration, it's not because of the systems, it's because of the data, or the lack thereof, or low quality data, or whatever. So we spend a lot of time on data as well as processes and plans. If we can align these three things, then we can select the systems that will best support this particular model. Now, I've got a lot of things around the outside that are things that relate to systems and standards and those types of things. I'm not saying that they're not important. We have to align those with the core components of the enterprise architecture during the process of designing the solution. But for us, the main components are the plans, the business processes, and the data. Now, this is a critical picture for making my point. End-to-end processes, and this relates directly to the extended enterprise. End-to-end processes usually originate outside your organization. Someone could place an order for a particular product, for example. They may end outside of your organization as well. They're delivered to someone, an end customer. The question is, how do you manage it across the enterprise so that you can be sure that that end-to-end process delivers in the most efficient and the effective way the output that goes to the customer? Now, a lot of software vendors will tell you that they can provide a complete solution for doing that. And some of them are quite good if you implement all of their products. On all the projects that we've ever worked on, never are 100% of the business processes implemented in a single software product. Almost always, complex organizations will have multiple software products that they're trying to manage these end-to-end processes that flow across the organization. So you can see in this case, maybe you think of that process as order fulfillment. It may include some steps in accounting and finance, some in human resources for workers who are working on the project, manufacturing certainly, maybe product lifecycle management, etc. So different parts of the organization contribute and have to enable that end-to-end process that in the end delivers something. In some cases, it's inside the organization. In some cases, it's outside of the organization. So from a supply chain management point of view, everything is focused on how do I manage these end-to-end processes. And there are certain end-to-end processes that are more critical than others, but the aspect of supply chain management that is interesting is that the organization who is doing the implementation doesn't own all segments of the process. Some of it's owned internally, some of it's owned externally in a supplier organization or in a customer organization or in a third-party logistics provider organization. So the question from a supply chain management point of view is how do I manage that end-to-end? And, I had a recent conversation with the director of supply chain management from IDS Logistics Liam Phone Group up in Hong Kong. And he told me from a product flow point of view, we're really pretty good at that. He said, street level routing on the front end, he said, we'll never solve that problem. It's too complex in Asia. He said, like in China, sometimes it shows up on a bicycle, sometimes it comes on a truck, but it'll get there. And trying to model that and trying to manage that is beyond our ability to do that at this time. Street level routing is just too hard, too difficult. But he said, once we take control of the product, we can track it. We can track it from beginning to end. But he says, I don't have everything that I need. He says, I have to align that not only with the physical flow of products, but I have to align it with a lot of other things, including financial factors, contractual factors, risk management factors, those types of things. So we've made tremendous progress in terms of what we call in-transit visibility or end-to-end visibility of goods that flow across the supply chain. We can track them fairly well right now with supply chain execution software. The next big step is how do we aggregate information in all of those areas that are not typically associated with the flow, direct end-to-end in-transit visibility from a goods perspective. How do we aggregate that information, manage it, and present it in the right kind of way to help managers make better decisions? He said, I need something that sits on top that gives me the insight that I need in order to better manage my supply chain from an end-to-end process point of view. Well, in the supply chain area, I'll give you just the punchline before I get to it. That concept that provides that visibility end-to-end across all those factors from an end-to-end business process perspective is called a control tower. And I'll get to that in a minute, but you see control towers at the airport every time you fly. You've got someone in the top with air traffic controllers in it who are collecting information about a lot of things that are going on down below, and they're providing information and making decisions in real time or near real time to guide directions into the future. This is similar, very similar, but except it applies to supply chain. Now, this is our complete model. I'll just walk you through it. Business processes, modeled in using some business process management tool. There's some out there that are quite sophisticated nowadays. We use a tool from quite often from a company called Software AG. I think they have a presence here in Thailand. They have a very good tool for managing business processes. As a matter of fact, from a Gartner evaluation perspective for business process analysis, they're one of the leaders. For those business processes, the first thing that we do is we align with them the data. The data first, we detail it through workshops at kind of a high level, what we call the object level, and then we detail it all the way down to the data element level. We manage that in an IBM product that's from their InfoSphere suite of tools that's called the Business Glossary. We actually link the data to the processes formally in the modeling tools, and then we link it directly to the physical location and to the IT systems that fall down below. So now, from an architectural point of view, I've got top to bottom linkage. If someone changes a plan inside of an organization, we're going to do X as opposed to Y. We can tell which business processes are affected. We can change the business process, and because of this linkage, we can actually tell the physical data elements in the systems below that are affected by those changes. Now, what happens then? Well, you can't take the human out of the loop. You have to have what we call governance. You have to have a group of people that when someone changes something that might break something somewhere else, they have to intervene. And typically, no one wants to change because they have to incur a cost. My way's right, your way is wrong. So there has to be someone, a governing body, that makes the decision on who's going to change so that everything still fits together as one. And in the literature that we work in, that's called governance. I won't go into it in a lot of detail other than saying it's a group of people who own data and own processes working together inside of organization in order to be sure that these tools can be managed in the right kind of way. There's a lot of definitions of governance. There's program governance, project governance, IT governance, business process governance, data governance. All of them are important. And we'll talk about those some more during our discussions later this afternoon. We have a full model that includes program, project management. Every organization is different, so this is kind of a reference model. It's what a typical implementation might look like. You can see we have some projects that are down below. We have, in this case, an ERP project, a supply chain management project, RFID project. It's whatever's down there. These have to be managed in such a way as a whole, holistically, so that they align with those end-to-end business processes. We also have a separate data management office, a governance body. This is the type of model that we typically advise senior managers on in terms of implementation. I mentioned this earlier. I'll say it again. Most organizations don't have a full appreciation for the need of doing this until the second time around, after they've already spent a lot of money and they've seen the problems that can arise from not being able to manage things end to end like this. If you're smart enough to do it on the front end, you're in a rare group of companies. Most companies, this is something that happens on the second time around, after they've experienced the problems associated with not doing it correct the first time. And the control tower is specifically a supply chain concept. It doesn't have to be.
Thomas,
Yep.
5 minutes, I think.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, I'll finish. We have to have some way to have a central view of what's going on down below in those business processes and to be able to drill down and make changes. And I'll just leave it at that. In the supply chain literature, a lot of companies claim to be able to do that. This particular figure I took from a company named Canoxus. Another one, Eda Open, is quite active in the region. I can just tell you that every company is different. And even though these solutions are a good starting point, you're going to have to do some work in order to provide a pure control tower solution. So let's wrap up now to talk about some of the implementation challenges. And I'll hit one of them really hard. If I'm a supplier, why should I participate in your control tower? Mr. Big Company, why should I do that? This is not a technology issue. Why should I share with you? How do I know that you're not going to be working with somebody else tomorrow who's my competitor? So the challenges around supply chain control towers are not technological. They're how do you put incentives in place so that everyone will share? And there's a lot of research that shows that everyone is better off if everyone shares. But the current thought is that you pay. You give a supplier a discount in order to participate. That's kind of the prevailing model. But the challenges are behavioral. They're not technical. So here's my summary. I focused on 3 topics. Didn't do any of them very much justice. You can't talk about 35 years of work in 30 minutes. But extended enterprise integration, enterprise business architecture, and governance are the key components of a supply chain management solution. The extended enterprise integration part is a direct follow-on from the definition of enterprise integration, which lies within organizational boundaries. I made the argument that you need all three of these topics to come together in the right kind of way in order to plan for the extended enterprise and this whole topic area we call enterprise planning and management. And then I made the argument that specifically for supply chains, that if you have data, process, and plans aligned, then you've got a much better, across the extended enterprise, you've got a much better chance of implementing a control tower than if you don't. And then I discussed the control tower implementation challenges, which I noted were primarily behavioral as opposed to technical. I gained you 10 minutes. I started 10 minutes late and I finished on time. I'd be happy to take any questions later. I don't think we have time right now, but it's up to you. What do you want to do?
Thank you, Professor Thomas. Maybe later.